record. Awesome. Maybe what we can do is tell me what you are currently studying, the university you are attending, and where that is located in the United States.
Okay, so I'm at Moravian College and I'm double majoring in biochemistry and mathematics at the moment. And Moravian is about 2 hours out of New York.
Amazing.
It's a small little town in Bethlehem that's 2 hours out of New York, and it's very isolated and it's very nice, very student oriented town.
That's awesome. So when you were looking to go to the US, did you have a particular particular city you were looking at, or were you kind of just like anywhere in the United States would do?
So originally it was a case of anywhere in the United States, but when I sat down with Justin and everybody, they were like, look, you come from a small school, and my school was like, I think 48 people that were with me.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So they were like, listen, you come from a small school. We think that if you get thrown into a big school, it might just like throw you off. So they recommended the smaller schools, and Moravian is one of the upper ones in terms of they have a great nursing program. Their science program is good in the sense that like a lot of people go to med school, they move on, things like that. So, and they have a very small graduating class. So
that's nice.
From there I was like, okay, well, this makes sense. And then the location kind of just, it flowed on. It was like, this is, when we got there, it was a case of, this is a small town. It's very student orientated. You can like walk down the street and then there's all the shops like right there.
Everything you need.
So when that came into play, then it was like, okay, this is a good place to be.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that. And when you got there, like maybe you can just kind of reminisce a little bit, what was like emotions wise, like leaving family kind of behind and stepping into the unfamiliar, like what was that experience like for you?
Well, my family came with and settled me all down, and they settled me in, and they were like, let's buy your stuff for college, let's get all your stuff going. When they left, it's very difficult because you're kind of like, well, I'm here, I'm in a foreign country. I'm like, I don't have people to like communicate with or something like that. It's like, I've got to start brand new.
Yeah.
And it's hard for the first, I would probably say the first month and a half where you just like, well, I don't know what's happening.
100%.
And you just gotta stick with it. And the biggest part is that you gotta know that your family is like a phone call away. You can't just go down the stairs or go somewhere and be like, hey mom, hey dad, like how's your day? It's like you gotta sit on a phone call with them, and then you gotta take into account the time difference, and you're like, well, it's like 11 o'clock at night there right now. So you're gonna wake them up from sleeping. So but I think that part really grows you up in the sense that it grows you up in the sense that you're like, I know what I got to do, and I can't rely on mom and dad, and I got to just put my head down and go with what I'm doing. So it's very difficult in the beginning, and you're like, well, I'm not certain of myself. I'm not certain of what I'm doing. I'm not certain of where I'm going. And like, I'd probably say for the first month and a half, or like even a little bit before that, you start questioning yourself. You're like, was this a good plan? Like, was this a good idea? Like, what did I do here? And then once you get over that and you start like talking to people, or people start like coming and talking to you, or they're like, hey, your accent is cool, or something like that.
It's the most common line you get.
and then things just happen, and then you're like, okay, well, this is me. Like, this is me growing. This is me becoming my own person in this new country. And I think that's a big crucial step. Is just like, you got to realize that you're on your own, and you got to grow that way.
I love what you said though. You said like you just had to put your head down, and just, it's almost like you have to remember why you're there. Like, what was the reason for you coming in the first place? I think, I would agree with you. The first 6 weeks, 100% the roughest, because it's an adjusting phase. It's climate, it's environment, it's a new place. It's very unfamiliar, and so that feels uncomfortable, right? And so kind of adjusting to that. But I love what you said, just keeping your head down and just staying focused on what you need to focus on. but your family isn't gone. They're not like completely out of the picture. You can still call them and you can still FaceTime and do all those things. I was going to ask you, when you arrived, did you meet like other international students that kind of help you like settled in and just kind of make the process easier, or was it more people from the university that helped to, you know, kind of make you feel a little bit more at home?
So I'm the odd one out in the international sector.
Yeah.
Um, because I walked in and I was like, hey, like, here we are. This is what we're doing. This is what's happening. And I'm friends with a lot of the international guys, but a lot of the international students stick to the international students. And I'm just like, well, I like this guy better, so I'm going to go stand over there right now.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I work. But initially when I got there, there was another South African that came with me to the same college. And that was, you know, a good way to just be like, okay, there's some familiarity. But then there's at my college is like there's a lot of Saudi people, there's a lot of like Chinese people, and then there was an Australian that came with me as well. So there's a lot of people that you interact with, and then you're like, well, you know, you're not the only person going through this. And the college or the university where I was going was good in the sense that they brought their international students that are already on campus. So they're older, the older people are now like, we can get you situated, like we can help you, we can find which way you're going. And so they kind of like help you settle in and ease into it. But it depends on your field of study as well. Because I mean, in my field, I'm mainly surrounded by American people. I don't really have international people around me, particularly in my grade. So I'm like, okay, well, so you learn to adapt to your surround, to adapt to the people that are around you in order to become comfortable. Because like, it's not going to help if you're sitting there on your own when you got to interact with the Americans that are there when you're an international student. So sometimes you gotta kind of just like swallow yourself and be like, let's do this, and then try and just like go forward and make friends. And I'd probably say that like the friendly face is probably the best way to just like, you know, once that things just keep going forward and then you become relaxed.
I love that. Like you didn't stick, because I obviously was a student through WSS myself. And I don't want to say like that's something I did, but in the beginning I did because it was someone else who could relate, someone else who was going through the same thing I was going through. So like my first friends were Canadians, and we hung out all the time. They didn't also go home as often as I did, as a lot of other students did as well. So we kind of stayed on campus obviously the most of the time. But I agree with you, like you have to make friends outside of international students, you know, because you're gonna be in classes with people who might be American, you know, and so you want to become friends with them as well. And for you, was it a big culture shock? Because like New York, in a sense, when people think New York, they think Times Square, like, you know, middle of the city, the hype and the buzz. But where you are currently at, like, did you find any sense of a culture, just like differences, and like how did you like kind of adapt to that?
I would probably say there's no like real culture shock. It's just that people don't fully understand. Sometimes you have a different lingo, or sometimes you have a different way of speaking, and people are like, well, we don't understand what you're saying. So you got to kind of like adapt that way. But in terms of like the culture or things like that, like I didn't really personally find a difference when I was in the US, because the US and South Africa to me are like kind of synchronous in a sense like that. So the only thing that I found was that like when you're driving down the street, you're like, hey, there's no wall, like there's a house. So that's probably the biggest difference. And it's just that was the biggest thing. Besides that, it was just learning what to adapt to the way that the American lingo is, the way that the Americans think. Like that's probably the biggest way to do it, rather than be like, hey, like this is what we're doing. And, like this is me. It's just like it's a bit of an adaptation here and there to try and get everything together.
But it's also not changing who you are as a person. It's just kind of adapting to the culture that you're currently in. That's not saying you're just going with everything they say and do, and you know, you just go for it. But it's just like being conscious. Like I remember going to Subway and ordering a sandwich and saying tomato instead of tomato, and they would look at me weird. And so like it's like small things, you know, that they do. And I went to study in the South in Tennessee. What people would do is when they walked into someone else's home is they took their shoes off, because it was just a polite thing to do. So do the same thing. They'd call people, you know, instead of, we say uncle this or auntie that, they say ma'am and sir. So it's changing things to, it's also to show respect. It's not that I don't agree with what you're doing. It's just I also want to be respectful to your culture, because I'm in their home ground. You know what I mean? So just
Yeah.
be respectful of that as well. Yeah. And I was going to ask you. You said on campus, all 4 years.
Yes, I'm going back now in on August 12th,
Okay.
actually.
And what is like kind of room set up, just to give people like an idea, like do you stay in a dorm that's got communal bathrooms? What has your experience been like living in dorms, you know, for 4 years?
Okay.
Can you hear me?
So I've had, yeah, I can. Um, I've had three very different experiences in dorming for 3 years so far. So the initial dorm that I was in, it was a two man room. So it was me and my American roommate. And that one was mainly just like sorting out differences, working through it, like making sure that you and the person in the room are just like working through your differences, making sure that you're there,
Yeah.
understanding that like this person might not be on the same schedule as you, or like understanding that sometimes this person also needs their privacy. Sometimes
Yeah.
sometimes they need to be on their own. And then understanding that this person's going to bring their own friends into the space.
Yeah.
And just understanding that like you're living in that kind of community. um and I was on a crazy, we literally dubbed like the crazy floor. So it was a lot of community, a lot of people coming together. Like we were out like until 4 a.m. some days, and we had nothing to do the next day, or we were
Yeah.
snowed in or something like that. And it's like building the community. Just like you go to the bathroom, and it's not like your own little cubicle bathroom type thing. It's like you got everybody showering there, and everybody's going to the bathroom there, and it's like learning to interact with people, and learning to how like different people are interacting with you.
Yeah.
And it's just like learning other people around you. That was my freshman year. It's just like learning other people, learning how other people think, like
Yeah.
buying shower shoes, making sure you're doing fine, that type of thing.
Yeah.
When I then in my freshman year, I rushed to fraternity. And the second year, I lived in the fraternity house, and that was my own single room. But the difference there was that sometimes there were brothers that were up at like 4 a.m. just like mucking around
Yeah.
downstairs, or on party weekends, it's like you're lying in the frat house and at a party station, and it's like you want to get sleep, but you got this massive speaker going on underneath you. So
Yeah.
it's like it's just like you got a different environment, so you got to adapt to the environment that you're in. um and it's like then there you're a little bit closer to the people, because you're like, well, we're fraternity brothers, like we've
Yeah.
rushed, we're brothers. We talk more about things that are like you internally and things like that.
For sure.
And then from the second year, from my sophomore year, I became an RA. And last year I was an RA for what we had.
Yeah.
um and that was a different sense, because now I was in a room by myself and I had my own suite, but then I was looking after a community as
Yeah.
well, and learning about other people, and having people coming by and being like, hey, I have a problem, can you come and help me with
Yeah.
it? Or um, telling people, listen, we have nurses over here that are writing an exam and at like 6 a.m. or